In Leathercraft, there are a variety of different tools on the market. The tools in this course are going to be your foundational tools to your Leathercraft journey. Over time you can add to these tools as you tackle new or advanced projects. In this course I'll teach you the tools you need to get started in Leathercraft. Without further ado, let's begin this course. Your first tool will need to be a cutting mat. This will protect your blade as you are using them. Cutting mats come in a range of sizes and I would suggest having three. One for when cutting, another for using as a glue surface, and another for when applying edge stain or edge paint. This allows you to have a clean cutting mat for when cutting leather and not have dried edge stain, edge paint or adhesive on it. The next tool is some rulers. For a beginner, I recommend the 30cm and 15cm metal ruler. Make sure that the rulers are metal and not wood or plastic. You can add to this over time with a meter long ruler or other size rulers. A rounder is useful for tracing around leather patterns and can also be used to mark leather. You can use an awl to apply edge paint and to scuff up the grain surface of leather before gluing. In the case of scuffing leather before gluing, you can actually buy a dedicated scuffing tool for this. This is covered in more detail in course 3. There are many blades to cut leather. I like to use a utility knife. These are comfortable in your hand, the blades are sharp and they can be replaceable. And this means you don't need to worry about stropping. You can still strop the blades if you choose to. These blades can cut through thin leather all the way past 5mm stick leather. Be sure to get a good quality utility knife where the blade is secure and the blade doesn't wobble as you use it. When you change the blade, it's a good idea to wear some cut resistant gloves. Be sure to add cut resistant gloves to your tools. An edge creaser is a tool that has two uses. The main purpose of the tool is to mark a decorative crease line, and this can be used to mark your stitch line next to the crease line. Edge creases come in a range of different sizes, and I would suggest having the 1.5mm size. The edge creaser can also be heated up, and this can be used to melt beeswax into the edge at the burnishing stage. This is covered in more detail in the course on burnishing. If you don't like a decorative crease line, you can use a wing divider to mark your stitch lines. There are many different styles depending on brands. Another use for a wing divider is if you're making watch straps, belts or other projects that require you to know the precise measurements for center holes. To apply glue onto leather, I like to use a spatula. A paintbrush can be used, but I find as the adhesive dries, it stiffens up the brush. Even if you rinse with water, if there is any residue of adhesive remaining in the brush, when it dries, it will stiffen up the brush. Spatulas come in a range of different sizes. I would suggest having a larger one and a smaller one. To remove any excess glue off your leather edge, cutting mat or leather surface, you can use some crepe rubber. Crepe rubber can also be used to remove dried edge paint off surfaces or your cutting mat. To mark your stitch holes, you need a set of pricking irons or a set of stitching chisels. Now you don't want to get any size pricking iron or stitching chisels as they come in a range of different sizes, and you need to make sure that your pricking iron or your stitching chisels matches your thread size and your needle size. I use a 2.82mm and that's a 9 stitches per inch pricking iron with a 0.414mm thread or a 0.57mm thread with a 0.9mm needle. A good size pricking iron or stitching chisel I'd recommend is a 2.82mm, 3mm or 3.175mm, essentially a 9, 8.4 or 8 SPI. Pricking irons tend to be used with an awl, but today not always. Originally, pricking irons had larger tapers. This meant that these pricking irons were only designed to go about a quarter to halfway through leather, hence the name pricking iron. If you did go all the way through leather with these vintage pricking irons, depending on the thickness of the leather of course, you would have larger holes on entry due to the taper and smaller holes on the exit. To compensate for this, an awl was used to manually make each of the holes following the marks made by the pricking iron. Nowadays, pricking irons are manufactured to be less tapered and able to go through thicker leather. These pricking irons here have gone through more than 5mm stick leather. Stitching chisels are the other design and they have the exact same measurements as pricking irons. The teeth are one size with no taper, and you don't need to worry about using an awl with these. The holes on the stitching chisels tend to be generally diamond shaped holes as opposed to the slanted holes on the pricking irons. There is a slight difference between diamond shaped holes and slanted shaped holes. Me personally, I prefer the slanted shape holes. It tends to be more traditional to have these slanted shape holes. If you want to use diamond shape holes, you're more than welcome. I've also had experiences with the teeth snapping on stitching chisels when removing from leather. Now this is just an experience that I had with a particular brand of stitching chisels. This isn't saying that all stitching chisels, the teeth will break when you remove them from leather. It's just an experience that I had, and just to let you know. In short though, I prefer pricking irons to stitching chisels, and it's up to you which one you'd like to get. In terms of an awl, I found an awl useful, especially to have when using pricking irons. Aim to get an awl that is a similar width to the stitch hole made by the pricking iron, as a larger awl blade will make the stitch hole too big. Also make sure the awl fits comfortably in your hand. It's a tool that it's better to have one and not need it than need it and not have it. And there are some areas, such as under a belt keeper, on a tight corner of a bag gusset, where a pricking iron can sometimes not get to, and it's good just to have an awl. I've used an awl for back stitching when hand stitching a leather belt, and also if you're box stitching and doing other forms of traditional stitching. To go along with your pricking irons or stitching chisels, you need some thread and some needles. I have both linen and polyester thread, and I use the needles by John James in size 4. If you're using linen thread, you need to wax the thread with beeswax. It's not so much necessary to wax polyester and nylon thread, but you can if you want to. You need some thread clippers to clip your threads after stitching. Having some scissors are useful for cutting around leather patterns before gluing them onto card. A stitching pony is useful when hand stitching leather. Some flat nose pliers can be useful if you're having trouble pulling the needle through when hand stitching, especially back stitching. I highly recommend these. A rubber or nylon hammer is needed to hit your pricking irons. Do not use a metal hammer as you risk damaging the top of your pricking irons. To protect your pricking iron teeth when going through leather, you need a surface. You can use a chopping board, some soft wood, or you can buy one of these surfaces that can be bought at a Leathercraft supplier. An edge beveler will bevel a leather edge, making it rounded, making it easier to burnish. I use size 0 for most of my leather goods. A size 0 removes only a portion of the edge. This gives a nice look without removing too much of the edge. I use a larger size 3 for belts, dog collars and leads. This takes more of the edge off and allows these items to be more comfortable. Different brands of course will differ with how much their edge bevel takes off the edge, but a good rule of thumb is a size 0 and a size 3. I prefer this design where the blade is flush with the bottom. This allows it to be used on thinner leather. Although if you do have an edge beveler like this one here, I have some tips for this design. A flathead hammer can be used to flatten stitches after stitching. A bone folder is useful for opening up pockets after a wallet project is complete. You can use a bone folder to flatten stitches in areas where a hammer can't get to, such as underneath a keeper on a belt or watch strap. A bone folder can also be used for defining areas, such as in wet moulding, bag piping, etc. Another use for a bone folder is using it like a wood slicker to burnish leather edges. You'll be surprised how useful a bone folder is. Having a paring knife will allow you to skive leather, especially on leather edges. This angle is for a right-hander. You can do the same with a skiving knife, however I find not having a wooden handle allows for better movement and getting closer skives. Again, this is personal preference. I still have a straight blade skiving knife and I recommend having one of these, as one of the benefits of a straight blade skiving knife is that it can double as a regular knife. I prefer using the paring knife to skive leather, and I like to use the straight blade skiving knife on cutting corners on projects and other tasks that I wouldn't use a utility knife for. When skiving leather, you need a surface to protect your blade. Having a marble or granite slab, ceramic tile, or another smooth polished stone will be great for that. Just make sure that the surface is smooth. The thicker the stone, the more movement you have, especially if you're using a skiving knife with a wooden handle. Having a paring knife, you won't have to worry about the handle restricting the movement. A leather strop with some polished compound will allow you to maintain the edge of your knives. For burnishing the leather edges, you need a wood slicker. It's best to have more for the different edge stains or when using no stain at all. Another option is using a bone folder or canvas or denim for the same purpose as a wood slicker. It's personal preference which one to use. You should then get a refillable marker, more than one for the different stain colours, some edge stain, Tokonole, canvas such as cotton, or you can use some denim. If you cut the canvas or denim into small sections, you can use them to burnish different colour edge stains or to burnish with no stain at all. Finally, some beeswax or a hard wax like Columbus wax to finish the leather edges when burnishing. This is covered in more detail in the course on burnishing. A horsehair brush is great for when having to buff leather. You can also use one to clean any dust or light debris off your bench or your machines. Just make sure that you buff the brush out after buffing any dust or debris. I buff the horsehair brush against the edge of the desk if I've used it to brush off the bench, shelves, sewing machine or splitter. Finally, having some safety equipment of safety glasses, ear protection, cut resistant gloves, some other gloves and a respirator are useful to have. Some additional tools you should aim to get are some sandpaper, roughly in the grits 200, 400, 600, 800, 1000 and 2000, If you can't find the grits, just go roughly in between, a French edger, adjustable edge creaser, and a thickness gauge. You'll be surprised how useful these tools are at making wallets, keyrings, notebooks, desk mats, etc. That leads us to the end of this course. If you have any questions, feel free to get in contact with me through email or social media. Be sure to enjoy your leather crafting.